Hi there, Fiddler Dan here, and one of the questions that I get a lot is what's the best student violin? Because people come to my shop and they just want the best for their child. It's a complicated question though, and usually it starts with me finding out about their child, how long they've been playing, who their teacher is, and even what position they might sit in the orchestra, and we unfold from there. But I thought today what might be worthwhile is to just talk through what I think makes up a good student violin, because the answer is variable, and if you take these factors into consideration, it might help you in your own selection. So essentially, the choice of a violin, and not just a student violin, is a balancing of three main factors. Starting with the ability of the player and the future ability of the player, the quality of the instrument itself, and that leads into how much that instrument's likely to cost, which is, I guess, one of the most important parts, but shouldn't be the most important part of a purchasing decision for a student violin, or any violin for that matter. So you can vary if depending on your ability now or into the future. That will drive the needs of the quality of the instrument that you need, and be pretty strongly related to the cost of that instrument as well. So you can get cheaper instruments and you can get more expensive instruments. So really, I guess the thing is to make sure that you don't get a violin that is too restrictive. That is, there's this kind of minimum threshold for the cost of an instrument, because that relates to the minimum quality of the instrument, and I guess the beginner level ability. If you go cheaper than that and buy a cheap eBay violin, for instance, it's actually never going to sound any good, and because the quality is just not that good. So there's a level of quality that I don't recommend going below, and I'll touch on that a bit later. By the same token, you can spend an awful lot on a violin, but at some point it's actually not going to make any difference. And that is because it's going to be limited by the ability of the player. You can buy a fantastic instrument, but if the player's not ready to get the most out of that instrument, it's not actually going to make any difference to their playing. So with that in mind, there's this kind of sweet spot that you can play around in, between the minimum that you can get away with and the maximum that's going to have a benefit to how it sounds, which for me is the most important aspect. So we're looking at the ability of the player, and we might think about the ability going into the future. So if you're learning, you're going to improve. So you might want to think about that as well. There's the quality of the instrument itself, and by quality I mean not just the making of it, but its setup as well. And all of these will influence the cost and give you kind of a range of costs that you might be able to spend. And then depending on how much is in your wallet, you can make that decision. So I will talk about these three factors together: the ability of the player, the quality of the instrument, and then finally the cost. So I've got this picture off the interweb. As you can see, this is not likely to be a skilled player. So when your skill is not great, and please don't ever do this to your bow, when your skill is not great, there's a limit to what you can actually get out of the instrument. It's reasonable to expect that over the years of owning an instrument that you will improve in your ability, and so when you select an instrument, you want to be mindful of that improvement. And hopefully you're investing in some lessons as well. Certainly I think this young lady could benefit by that. Then there's the quality of the instrument, and I would suggest these instruments off some marketplaces are not going to meet that minimum threshold of quality to actually sound like a violin. Then there's the quality of the setup of the instrument. it's my job to set up instruments, and far too often I see instruments come into my shop that have been bought but actually haven't been set up properly. And if they're not set up properly, they're really quite difficult to play, and they affect the sound as well. So are the strings high enough above the fingerboard so that they're not buzzing? Are they not too high above the fingerboard so that you can put your fingers down easily and transition from string to string quite easily? Is the angle of the bridge going to support the changing of the strings? All of these things are a part of the setup. Has the bridge been carved properly? Does it fit properly so that the sound of the strings vibrating can get down into the body? And there's a whole rabbit hole there that you can go through with a video that I did recently on how a violin makes sound. And then there's things like the sound post as well on the inside that you won't see but have a massive influence on how an instrument sounds. Finally, because you might not necessarily be able to gauge these things yourself, you might look to something like the seller's expertise, and that can really help you understand the quality of the instrument. So if where you're buying your instrument from, you should try the instrument yourself, but if you can get the seller of the instrument to play it as well, then that will by hearing them play, you'll get an idea of whether they really understand violins or not, and that can be a good guide to the quality of the instrument you're getting yourself. So if you're walking into a generalist music store and they're selling violins, if they don't play them, then you don't know whether the instrument's been well set up, unless of course you're at a certain level of expertise that you can ascertain that for yourself. And finally, the cost of an instrument. These instruments that I've got pictured here, most of them are beautiful looking instruments and you get the full package. But they tend to be made of plywood, pressed plywood, so they look lovely but never sound fantastic. I've got a video on looking inside one of those, so please check that out if you like. What's a rough guide? I think a rough guide is, in Australian dollars, spend about $300 on a violin plus $100 per year of playing that you have already had or are about to have had. So if you're just starting out, $300 is okay. If you've been learning for a couple of years, then maybe you want to think about $500 or more on an instrument. One big factor for that is, are you buying a full size or a fractional instrument? And by fractional I mean half size, quarter size, three-quarter size. Because if you have those, you're not likely to have them for all that long, just a couple of years at best. So when you buy one, you might want to get away with spending a bit less, but if you're not spending enough to be able to support the level of the playing, then that's something to consider, because if it don't sound great, your child is not likely to keep on playing. If you're buying a full-size violin, then you need to decide, okay, am I buying a violin for today? Am I buying a violin for the next couple of years? Or am I going to buy my, and we call this the forever violin? That is an instrument that you're going to buy now and just keep and probably not upgrade. And a consideration there is, do you enjoy violin? Are you likely to keep playing? If you're a school student after school, are you planning to go to university to study violin, and so on. So that's ability, quality and cost of the instrument. Three factors to consider. By far and away, one of the biggest things that you can do is ask your teacher about violins, and they will likely recommend places to go to or instrument brands that they think are good brands. In general, this is pretty good advice. Keep in mind some teachers have relationships with stores, so that's a factor as well. Also, particularly in school instrumental programs, the list of recommended instruments is generally not exhaustive, so there are many more brands out there. What the teacher is trying to do is avoid you to avoid you from buying the plywood and the cheaper violins, so that you have something of reasonable quality, because there is nothing a teacher dislikes more than listening to bad instruments all day, every day. So look, my recommendation to you, buy the best violin that you can reasonably afford, and keep in mind what you're going to develop into as a player. Please get the shop to play it as well as yourself. If they can't play it, then that's a guide to how well they might know the product or the setup. If you've bought a nice instrument and you want to get more from it in a couple of years, there's a whole host of strings out there that can really improve the sound of a violin, and bows too. Bows can make a phenomenal difference to violins, so please look into upgrading your bow down the track. Some people suggest you can even spend up to 1/3 of the price of a violin on a bow. Please stay off eBay, Amazon, Aldi, or any other marketplace that might sell violins. Unless you really know what you're looking for, it's too easy to buy something that looks lovely but is not really going to support your musical needs. And finally, second-hand violins can really be great value. Yes, they may look knocked around a bit, but the sound level is as good, but probably better than the day they were bought. So second-hand is fantastic. Older European instruments in particular can have some really quite sophisticated tones, which can be something to think about as well. So look, that's it from me and my thoughts on what is the best student violin. I look forward to hearing from you, and good luck with your instrument selection. Bye for now.